You've been using Windows your whole life. It's been on school computers, office machines, and that family PC your dad was always going to fix. Windows has existed since 1985, which makes it older than most people watching this. Some versions were legendary. Some were disasters Microsoft would love for you to forget. Here is every major one from the beginning, explained fast. Windows 1.0 and 2.0. It's 1985, and the average computer understands only typed commands. No icons. Curse. No mouse. Just a blinking cursor waiting for you. Microsoft launched Windows 1.0 to bring a graphical interface to the masses, running on top of MS-DOS. The defining problem was that it barely worked. Windows couldn't overlap. They tiled across the screen like a bad game of Tetris. The system needed 256 kilobytes of RAM and a 4.77 MHz processor. Windows 2.0 followed in 1987 and finally let Windows stack on top of each other, which sounds modest and was transformative. Windows 1.0 launched at $99 and almost nobody bought it. Software support was nearly non-existent. Apple had launched the Mac in 1984, so Microsoft was playing catch-up from day one. But the idea was planted. These two versions were the rough draft that made everything else possible. Windows 3.1. By 1992, Microsoft had finally delivered something people wanted to use. Windows 3.0 was decent, but 3.1 was the version that stuck. It ran on 386 and 486 processors and needed at least 1 megabyte of RAM. It brought TrueType fonts, better multimedia, and genuinely reliable program management. Using it felt like getting proper directions after years of wandering. Still some friction, but clearly headed somewhere. Solitaire and Minesweeper ship bundled, officially, for mouse training. Sure, Windows 3. One sold over 3 million copies in its first few months at around $50 for an upgrade. It also introduced an early form of the Windows registry, still accumulating entries on your PC today. This is the version where Windows became a real platform. Developers started caring. Users started choosing it. Everything before this was a draft. Windows 95. August 1995 felt less like a software launch and more like a cultural moment. Microsoft spent around $300 million on marketing and licensed the Rolling Stones' "Start Me Up." People queued outside stores at midnight to buy an operating system. Windows 95 introduced the Start menu, the taskbar, and 32-bit application support. Three things that still define the desktop experience today. It ran well on a 486 with 8 megabytes of RAM and included dial-up internet support for the first time. Using it felt like moving into a proper house after years of camping. Everything had a name, a place, and a purpose. Full copies retailed around $209, upgrades around $89. Windows 95 sold millions within its first months and reset expectations for consumer software. Everywhere. The Start menu alone is still with us 30 years later. Windows 98. June 1998, and Microsoft was doing what it did best in that era, iterating fast. Windows 98 was Windows 95 with the rough edges filed down and a few new ideas added. USB support now actually functioned, which was a bigger deal than it sounds. The Active Desktop let you embed live web content on your desktop. Cool in theory, noticeably slower in practice. Minimum hardware was a 486 at 66 MHz with 16 megabytes of RAM. Day-to-day, it ran like a well-maintained bicycle compared to Windows 95's version with the slightly flat tire. Multi-monitor support arrived here too, still one of the most underrated features in Windows history. The upgrade cost around $89 and most buyers were glad they paid it. Windows 98 SE cleaned up the remaining issues in 1999. This was the Internet-era PC finally feeling like a finished product. Windows ME. September 2000, and Microsoft was trying to bridge the old Windows 9X consumer line toward its more stable NT architecture. The bridge collapsed. Windows Millennium Edition loaded the aging 9X kernel with new features. System Restore, Windows Movie Maker, and automatic updates all debuted here. Good ideas, terrible execution. ME crashed constantly, and when it crashed hard. Like borrowing a car that just stops dead on the highway with no warning. A 150 MHz Pentium and 32 megabytes of RAM met the minimum spec, but no amount of RAM could fix the instability. ME retailed at $109. It is widely considered the worst consumer Windows release in history. Windows XP arrived just 1 year later and effectively pretended ME had never happened, which was probably the right call. Windows XP. October 2001, and after the ME disaster, Microsoft came back with something genuinely different. Windows XP was the first consumer Windows built on the NT kernel. The same solid foundation used in Windows 2000. Real stability finally. A 300 MHz processor and 128 megabytes of RAM ran it respectably. The lunar theme, the rolling hills wallpaper, and that bright start button gave Windows its most iconic look ever. Day-to-day XP was fast, reliable, and genuinely pleasant to use. Running it on a mid-range Pentium 4 felt like the computer was finally on your side instead of working against you. Home Edition launched at $119. Professional at $209. XP received support for over a decade before Microsoft cut it off in April 2014. If you're still running XP somewhere, drop the machine specs in the comments. I genuinely need to know. XP set the standard for consumer operating systems, and everything after tried to match it. Windows Vista, January 2007, and Microsoft had taken over 5 years to follow up Windows XP. Expectations were enormous. What arrived was beautiful but sluggish. Vista introduced Aero Glass, DirectX 10, and user account control. Improved search was in there too. But UAC asked for confirmation on literally every action your computer took. Clicking Allow became a part-time job. The minimum was a 1 GHz processor and 1 GB of RAM. On modest hardware, it ran like a sports car stuck in concrete, stunning to look at, painful to move. Home Premium Editions ran around $239. The Vista-capable sticker situation made things worse. PCs were marketed as Vista-ready but couldn't run its premium features. A lawsuit followed. Vista's legacy is mostly cautionary. It pushed hardware vendors forward, laid the groundwork for Windows 7, and taught Microsoft that shipping half-polished costs more than anyone planned.
Windows 7.
October 2009, and Microsoft had one job: fix Vista. They nailed it. Windows 7 was built on Vista's foundation, but trimmed, tuned, and polished until it actually worked on normal hardware. Aero stayed but ran faster. UAC got quiet. The minimum was 1 GHz and 1 GB of RAM for 32-bit systems, 2 GB for 64-bit. Where Vista was a sports car stuck in concrete, Windows 7 was that car after someone finally cleared the road. Home Premium launched at $199. Windows 7 went on to become one of the best-selling software products in history. It earned a level of loyalty that other Windows versions could only dream about. IT departments loved it so much they refused to migrate for years. Some held on well past its January 2020 end-of-support date. For many people, Windows 7 remains the gold standard of what Windows should feel like: responsive, familiar, and completely out of your way. Windows 8 and 8.1. October 2012, and Microsoft watched the tablet market explode and redesigned Windows around touch. On a tablet, this made sense. On a desktop with a keyboard and mouse, it felt like someone replaced your steering wheel with a joystick. Technically usable. Deeply disorienting. The start menu was gone, replaced by a full-screen tile grid called Metro. Minimum specs were 1 GHz and 1 GB of RAM. The system booted impressively fast, which nobody appreciated because they were booting into something they didn't want. Upgrades started around $119. sales were modest, mostly on new hardware. Windows 8.1 arrived in 2013 and brought back a Start button. Not a real Start menu, just the concept of one. If you actually liked Windows 8, tell me why in the comments. Windows 8 taught Microsoft that it could push users toward change, just not over the edge all at once. July 2015, and Microsoft pressed the reset button hard. They skipped Windows 9 entirely, the most famous version number that never existed, for reasons that have become tech trivia legend. The Start menu was back, the desktop returned. Windows felt like Windows again. The free upgrade for Windows 7 and 8. One users came via a relentless pop-up campaign. It felt less like a gift and more like a salesperson who wouldn't take no for an answer. But the OS earned it. Minimum specs were a 1 GHz processor and 2 GB of RAM, with DirectX 12 and the new Edge browser included. Windows 10 grew to over 1 billion active devices, the most widely used operating system on Earth. Updates rolled in for a decade. Some great, some questionable. After Windows 8, this was exactly what users needed. Familiar, fast, and willing to just let you work. Windows 11. October 2021, and Microsoft arrived with a redesigned interface and hardware requirements that divided the community immediately. The new look brought rounded corners, a centered taskbar, and a cleaner layout. On new hardware, it felt like moving into a renovated apartment. Same bones, everything rearranged. It also required TPM 2.0, secure boot, and an 8th Gen Intel or AMD Ryzen 2000 series processor at minimum. That locked out millions of capable machines, and people were not quiet about it. Minimum specs included a dual-core 1 GHz processor, 4 GB of RAM, and 64 GB of storage. On compatible hardware, it runs cleanly. The centered Start button divided opinions. You can left align it in settings, just so you know. Gaming features like direct storage and auto HDR were genuinely useful additions. Windows 10 hit end of life in October 2025, making 11 the only supported consumer option now. Whether it earns the trust Windows 7 did is still being decided. From tiled windows that couldn't overlap to hardware cutoffs that locked out millions, Windows has covered some ground. The revolution of 95, the gold standard of XP, the chaos of ME, the comeback of 7. Every version taught Microsoft something about its users, sometimes gently, usually the very hard way. What a strange and enduring operating system this turned out to be. Which Windows version holds the most nostalgia for you? Drop it in the comments below. Hit the like button if this was useful. It genuinely helps the channel. Next up is every macOS version from System 1 all the way to Sequoia, which is a very different kind of story. Click the video on screen right now.